listening to the Small Town Queer podcast produced by Tweed Regional Museum in northern New South Wales, Australia. Follow us as we uncover and explore Tweed's rich queer history from the early 1900s to the present. The museum has collaborated with LGBTQIA+ community members to collect, share and preserve the histories of Tweed's many and varied queer voices. We wish to recognise the generations of local Aboriginal people of the Bundjalung Nation who are the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we are recording this podcast today. My name is Emma Shield.
And my name is Erica Taylor, and we are the curators of the Small Town Queer digital project and exhibition. Hello! On today's podcast, we talk to journalist, radio broadcaster, documentary maker, sound artist and writer, Daniel Browning. Daniel is a descendant of the Bundjalung people of far northern New South Wales and the Kullilli people of southwestern Queensland. He grew up at Fingal and has produced several documentaries on his ancestors and environmental issues there. He also presents Awaye on ABC Radio National, a radio program which surveys contemporary Indigenous cultural practice across the arts spectrum. Daniel also stars in SBS's Faboriginal. Welcome, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us on the museum's first ever podcast series. You and I met a few years ago and we worked on putting a little bit of your family story in the museum. And this is a whole different project, Small Town Queer.
It is indeed.
We're just asking everyone, so our listeners have some context, how do you identify as a small town queer?
Well, this whole word queer has kind of been, back when I first came out in the early 90s, I came out as a gay man and there wasn't really that much. There was a lot of queer theory happening at that time, and I was at university, and so I knew about queer theory, but I've always felt like, keep it simple. For me, it's just that I'm a gay man, but I'm also an Aboriginal man, so I'm a saltwater Guri from Fingal. Well within the purview of the Tweed Regional Museum, hence my involvement with that, the history exhibits at the museum and my family's part in local history. So yeah, Guri, Bundjalung man, with strong ties to northern New South Wales or Lower Tweed and to the Gold Coast. But yeah, saltwater Guri who identifies as gay, queer if you like. I don't know. It depends on the day.
Yeah. Excellent. So you grew up. Tell us where you grew up.
My first childhood home was Fingal, and my family's been there for a very long time, and feel a very strong connection still with that particular place. Anyone who knows the Tweed will know what a beautiful little place Fingal is and how special it is. And, we've lived on that stretch of Letitia Spit, the peninsula, the Sand Peninsula down there leading towards the mouth of the Tweed River for a very long time. And I grew up around generations. I was lucky enough to have several great grandparents alive when I was born. And they continued on until I was in my 20s. And generations of, great aunts and great uncles who I remember very clearly. So I was very much embedded in that community in Fingal, and it was very much still an Aboriginal community. It's now, things have changed. It's a different kind of place, and there are luxury homes there on the Spit. But when I was growing up, it was just black families there, Aboriginal and Islander families living there. So that was my first childhood home. And then from there, we moved to South Tweed. We lived in South Tweed on Kirkwood Road for a long time, and another house on Kirkwood Road directly opposite the Tweed Aboriginal Museum, just near the very sacred Bora ground just there. And then we moved out to Cabarita. So I've always been local, but then I moved to Brisbane to go to university, and then obviously now living in Sydney.
For listeners who might not have hopped on the website yet, you've written such a powerful, beautiful kind of written piece about growing up around that area. So tell us a bit about how you felt growing up different in that family and that community.
Yeah, I mean, I think I talk about in the article about having this sense of being different and not quite knowing what that is. I mean, when you're real small, you don't know what it is because it's something that you'll get to much later in your life, and I know that's changed for a lot of people. Identity is something that people seem to work on much earlier. I just knew that there was something different about me, and that it would be wiser for me to keep that part of my identity a little bit of a secret. It's hard to imagine now. The closet was a real thing. It was like an iron cage. You could not penetrate that closet. It was around you all the time. And I guess when I moved out of home when I was 17 and moved to Brisbane to study at the University of Queensland, I started to kind of just realise that, it's what you make it. It can be a cage. It can be something that kind of confines you for your life, or you can just kind of not transcend it, but you can kind of liberate yourself. And that's kind of not possible in a small town. Well, it's possible, but not when I was growing up, not in the 70s and the 80s. Coming from the Tweed, you just didn't discuss your sexuality. It wasn't a topic of discussion unless you were heterosexual, in which case, you could rub it in people's faces. So, and that has an ongoing effect. I think it continues to have consequences in the way our sexual identities play out. It won't be so for the next generation and the generations after, hopefully, because they will have reached acceptance at a much earlier age. And I think that's what we're seeing. And that's fantastic. I just can't be dishonest and say that's how it was for me.
No, and that echoes in a lot of other stories of participants on this project. And we all hope that maybe projects like this will help that next generation just go through that stage and those processes a little bit easier.
Well, that's the hope, isn't it? I mean, why do we do these things except to kind of to let people know that, I don't want to say it gets better. I just want to say, it's not as bad as it seems. It's impossible to say that to someone who's experiencing extreme homophobia in the schoolyard or wherever, a workplace even. But the kind of capacity that you have to handle that kind of, that kind of social pressure to be something that you're not. Your capacity to handle those situations obviously gets better as you get older. You're just more used to it. But I want to be able to say to kids, if something's intolerable, you need to say something. If you're living, if your life is a living hell because of homophobia, racism, or whatever, you need to be able to say to someone, and for them to take you seriously. I don't know how many times, I complained about being bullied at school. And I don't know how many times my mother complained to the schools. But the attitude was that, it just happens, that's what kids do. And the cruelty of children is something that we're told to accept. But what about the cruelty of adults? Do we always accept this behaviour? Do we normalise it and say that it creates resilience, and is that enough? Do we simply put up with this kind of, it's deeply traumatic, and the people know that bullying can have all kinds of impacts on the other person's psychological well-being, and it continues to have kind of reverberant effects over one's life. Yeah, you can silence it. There's a lot of things you can do, but why do we always put the onus back on the victim? Why is it our job to deflect the abuse of others?
Yeah, that A very good point. And it is the behaviour and the things you see and go, you don't say anything about is what you accept, other people witnessing that. It's their roles to step in. It's everyone's role to step in when that behaviour is going on.
Yeah, and I think, just saying to someone you need to put some steel in your back, or you need to be tough, or you need to be able to weather this kind of abuse. Sure, like there are things that we do as human beings. See, we have to be held to account for our actions, the things that we do that perhaps cause others harm, or positions that we have to defend. That we all have those things in our lives that we are going to cop criticism, fair or unfair, for what we do. I just don't think being born is something for which a person needs to be criticised unendingly. You know what I mean? Like, why do we tolerate that? And, we are going to arrive at a place where it becomes so socially unacceptable to do that to people that it stops. If it doesn't stop, it becomes much less of a problem. And I can't speak for the current generation or any generation since, I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s. But what I think is happening is that the social unacceptability of homophobia is such that it's less likely to destroy someone. Although I know it still happens, and depending on how small the town is that you come from, you're still going to cop criticism for just being born, for being who you are, and things that you can't change.
And that's what we are exploring in this project, is that small town situation and how it's different or the same to larger cities. You grew up in that Tweed, Fingal area, and then you moved to Brisbane. What happens when you get out of that small pressure cooker type kind of situation into a city like Brisbane?
Well, I mean, it was the best thing I ever did, kind of leave home, and it wasn't just physically leaving the Tweed. It was, and I love my home. I love where I come from. I'm very proud to come from the Tweed. At 17, when I left home, maybe I wouldn't have been able to say that so, confidently. But when I moved to Brisbane, I kind of experienced that rush, you do when you are finally responsible for your own well-being, and there's no one there to kind of look after you. You have to do it yourself, and that kind of sense of independence and freedom is something that there's nothing like it. It's intoxicating, but with that comes also this the fact is that you do have to look after yourself. You do have to be on your guard, and you have to, be circumspect to a degree. And in the early 90s, when I lived in Brisbane, and I moved there in mid-1990 and stayed there until, I spent the first year of my cadetship also in Brisbane. So I probably moved out in, early 1995, so I spent quite a chunk of my young life in Brisbane. It wasn't that enlightened. We always say that Brisbane's just like a big, small town, a very big small town. Well, it was like that, and I would experience homophobia and, kind of homophobic abuse that was not unusual. But you do kind of go inward a bit and you go, well, what can I do to kind of modify my behaviour so that I don't attract the attention of homophobes? So that's what I had to do. I had to kind of, just be out and proud, but in a kind of be circumspect about that. And I remember going to protests about HIV/AIDS. I mean, we were in the grip of the pandemic. Another pandemic, HIV/AIDS was, ravaging communities. And this is like 1990, 1991. And, to be visible and to be gay was still, it was still tricky. But coupled with that was that sense of, independence and that I was, whatever happened, I was going to be okay. So yeah, there were two things. Yeah, that sense of independence, but it was also kind of a bit moderated by, the fact that homophobia was still blatant and still something that you would have to, that could threaten your life.
And I know we all talk about Brisbane in terms of it's a big country town in a way. Everyone says that. So, did you find any difference when you moved from Brisbane to Sydney at some stage?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it was much more, it was, I mean, I can't remember it feeling particularly different, but I know it was. I just can't kind of recall the how different or in what ways it was different. Certainly it was a much more liberated life, and it is a much more liberated life, I would say. But still, Sydney's not what it seems to other people. Sydney there's still homophobia. As long as we have homophobia, there'll be, the problem will kind of continue to be one that we have to kind of grapple with, the circumstances around, being totally open and totally honest with who you are, and being not just accepted, but kind of celebrated for that. That situation, we haven't reached that point in human history, I don't think. So there's still things to be negotiated. There's still kind of a contract that you make with society to kind of fit in. We all do it. Everyone fits in a different way, but we're still kind of we're still trying to fit in. Yeah, Sydney is a fantastic place, and I've lived most of my adult life here. But like I said, I still do think there is a way to go.
Yeah, and do you find maybe easier to find, a sense of community in the cities? We're just talking to a lot of our participants who have done the opposite of you. They didn't grow up here. They've moved here in their older years, and struggling to find that sense of community that we get an inkling that may be easier to find in the larger cities.
Yeah, I mean that's the idea, and I think that notionally that is true. That you're going to find more people who accept you for who you are in the city, just on the numbers. Like the likelihood of it increases because there are more people. The North Coast is the home of the radical fairies and tropical fruits and people who do that reverse thing of not being from the far North Coast, but then finding community there in ways that I couldn't have found when I grew up. And I think that's fantastic. It's provided a kind of a safe harbour in many ways, and that's how it should be. There should be somewhere on the continent where outside of the cities and outside of the kind of, just within the kind of outer reaches of the cities where acceptance can be found. And I keep talking about acceptance, and I think that's like, it's acceptance for me is acceptance came for me when my family accepted me. That was the most important thing. And you only come out really to your well, in my case, I only came out to my family. And once I came out there, that was my coming out. Like the rest of society, I couldn't give a rat's, like I had come out, and that was the most important people in the world knew. And that's that. It's out there, and, everything after that is kind of a bit of a walk in the park, really. So yeah, I think it's fantastic that, the far North Coast is a more accepting place for some people, and those little pockets of communities that seem to have to be more accepting, perhaps because they've been populated by people who have done that journey, who've come from the cities to find, a kind of happiness and peace in that beautiful country. I mean, there's something about the country. It has a special power. And I say that as a black man, but I say that also as a person who, can objectively feel how special it is. So, I do think that's great that there are communities that spring up, communities that accept each other. And, there might not be broad acceptance but as I say, the tide has kind of turned. It's a completely different world from when I was growing up. And the social unacceptability of homophobia is really what has changed that game for many of us. And it means that we can live with relative ease in small and large communities.
What does it mean to you to be queer and Aboriginal?
I've thought about this, and I do think that they're kind of indivisible in a way for me. They're both part of who I am. So it's very hard to go, how does it feel to be this, and then to bring it all in together. It kind of just is, and it's not a very satisfactory explanation, but it just is. I can't really imagine being any other way. I can't imagine not being queer and Aboriginal. It just is how it is. But I do think about them in relation to each other, and I do think about how does one inform the other or not, or is there a conflict between being queer and being Aboriginal? Of course there isn't. I mean, I don't feel that there is. In fact, the deepest acceptance I have is from Aboriginal women, and you're not just the women in my family, but more broadly. The essay that I wrote for Small Town Queer about this rearing army of wild and sedate black women who kind of had my back and always kept my back. Well, I would say that I've had just my Aboriginal friends who are women also keep my back over the years. So, there might be blackfellas who are actively homophobic. But I would say that homophobia is no more of a problem than in the wider community. But I do think there's work to be done there to kind of broaden our acceptance. I would say it's a masculine thing. It's a macho kind of heterosexist kind of thing to pretend that that there's some threat in the sexuality of others. I mean, and heterosexism and toxic masculinity finds problems with the sexuality of basically everyone who isn't toxic and masculine. So I don't take anything from it. I just think, I am queer, I am Aboriginal, and there isn't really anything. I'm not at war with myself over that. It just is who I am, and it just is. I know it's a really unsatisfactory answer, but they just go together for me, and they go together in my person, they go together in my actions. And there's a really famous quote from the Aboriginal artist, the international artist Tracy Moffat, who says, "If I bake a cake, is it Aboriginal?" And that kind of level of detail at which your actions and who you are is either Aboriginal or queer is something for you to decide. But I think, in the end, you are a human being, and the way you live out your life is as a human being, and your identity is very much part of that. But you don't go into everything you do and say, as a queer Aboriginal man, my position on this is this or that or that. It just is.
It's just you.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful answer.
But it doesn't actually answer the question.
No, it doesn't. But not all questions need an answer.
No.
It was something beautiful in that this country provides this safe space since the 70s, since the Aquarius Festival. has provided this safe space for this community to move here, and it's all kind of embedded in the landscape somehow.
I would say that, we often think that country doesn't have agency or that it doesn't have identity, but country does. Like our country, Bundjalung country, the lower Tweed, the far north coast, Tweed heads, the river itself, all those places have agency. And I was talking to Nardi Simpson, who's written this extraordinary book called Song of the Crocodile about not our country, but, Ualarai country, northwestern New South Wales. And she talks about how, there's about how places know people. Places have agency. Places remember, they know you, and they treat you like they know you. If we just think that there is some, not sentience, because that's like, there is something about country that welcomes us, and I feel that every time I come home. So yeah, just giving country the kind of space and the room to breathe and to allow country to take care of you. It's a real kind of embedded Guri way of seeing the world, but it is true. Country does take care of people. It always has, and that's what I feel when I'm there now, when I'm at home. And I can't feel it every day. So, but it's sudden and it's instant when I get off the plane in Coolangatta, pre COVID, or when I land in Ballina, I instantly feel kind of just a sense of relief. Like I'm back where I belong, and country does that.
That's amazing, and it's something that's been echoed in our interviews with men that moved here in the 70s and 80s. And when I ask them why here, no one can really tell me that this place is healthy and it feels good and it's somewhere they've come to find health and peace.
And you can feel it. Like if you spend enough time in a toxic environment, or if you spend enough time in a city and you're surrounded by things that are inherently unfamiliar. I mean, I remember when I first moved to Sydney, I just was overpowered by the stench of the city. Now I can't smell it, but when I came here, I was just like, this place really stinks. It's bizarre, but it's kind of like it was a sensory thing rather than it actually stinking. Like it was this sense that this is not familiar to me, and I don't know this smell. But as you kind of become more kind of inured to the difference, you don't see it anymore, or you don't smell, you don't perceive it. But when I go home, I'm always reminded of the things that I know, like the smell of the salt air, the smell of the bush, the smell of the morning, the smell of the trees, all those things that are familiar to me because I know them, are the sound of the birds, the drone of the ocean, all those things you have a memory of, they're familiar. But yeah, there is something really welcoming about where we come from. It has always welcomed me home, and I've always felt kind of a peace and a calm that you just don't feel it anywhere else in the world. And I'm glad to know that other people who aren't from where we're from also experience that objectively. It's not just something that we think because we come from there. Bias. We're all biased.
Yeah, we're all biased.
Yeah.
Daniel, is there anything you're working on you'd like our listeners to know about?
Yes, there's something kind of happening up on the coast, which is pretty important, and that's the Bleach Festival. And this year I'm one of the artists. It's the first Bleach Festival I've ever been involved in. And, the Bleach, Bleach is that Gold Coast festival. But really kind of also, I really feel that there's a sense of northern New South Wales also being present, and for us blackfellas, the border was kind of a bit porous. The border between Queensland and New South Wales is a border, but our ancestors traversed that border fairly easily for generations. So I've been invited to compare and host some sessions at the First Nations hub at Burleigh for the Bleach Festival, and on the opening weekend of the Bleach Festival. And the first person I'll be speaking to is my grandmother, who grew up in what is now Surfers Paradise, born in 1918, and she's 102 in December. And she's certainly one of the oldest people from Surfers Paradise, or from that part of the world, still alive, who can recall what it was like before it is now. So before all the concretes, and she just describes bush, but there was bush everywhere. And she's got some ripping yarns about growing up there and, living through the Depression. And she was born at the end of the First World War, but lived through the Second World War. And, in these times of COVID and the pandemic, we think that we're living through unprecedented times. But I would say that, if you talk to someone like my grandmother, you kind of you can put it all into perspective. So just listening to her talk about change and, change that is frightening. You don't have to be frightened, because there are people among us, our elders, who've lived through situations like this. And remembering the flu pandemic, the Spanish flu epidemic, that also cost people their lives here in Australia, and many returning servicemen were on boats that couldn't dock because there was an outbreak of Spanish flu on board those ships. And these men have just gone through 4 years of war, and then all of a sudden they're on a boat and they can't leave, and they can't be reunited with their families after the war has been declared at an end. So the guns fall silent, and they're still kind of living on these boats and all going through quarantine. So yeah, that's what I'd like to really say, is that the knowledge and the kind of perspective that we need on chaos and on global events is already in our communities. We just need to ask those old fellas. We need to get them talking and hear what they have to say. So, and my grandmother's a perfect example.
Oh, that's going to be a very, very special event. So I hope people can get along. Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and we'll leave it there.
Pleasure, and thank you so much for doing this, for deciding to create this exhibition. There's so much need to tell these stories, and I'm so glad that the Tweed Regional Museum undertook it. It's a real risk, but congratulations to you and to your team for doing this.
Thank you for listening to the Small Town Queer podcast. To hear more Small Town Queer stories, subscribe to the series and like, share and review this episode. And check out the Small Town Queer playlist on Spotify, curated by museum staff and project participants. For more information about Small Town Queer, visit museum.tweed.newsouthwales.gov.au/small-town-queer. Tweed Regional Museum is supported by the New South Wales Government through Create Funding New South Wales. This project would not have been possible without the support and collaboration of the people of Tweed, who have generously shared their lived experiences, archives and objects with this project.